Over the last 43 years, I've given more than 700 presentations of an illustrated lecture called Flying Saucers Are Real.
May 13th, 2019, the UFO field lost a legend.
The evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Stanton Terry Friedman, nuclear physicist who lived in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, passed away in the Toronto Pearson Airport while traveling, doing what he loved most, giving lectures to interested audiences.
I said, some people know more than others and aren't telling us. It took me 5 years to get these two examples of CIA UFO documents. You can read 8 words per page.
He was known as the Godfather of Roswell. Tirelessly researching the events of 1947, Roswell will forever be connected to Stanton Friedman. But that wasn't all. He would intricately and methodically research various topics like Bob Lazar, Betty and Barney Hill, advanced propulsion, and much more. Now, his legacy lives on at an archive in New Brunswick, as hundreds of boxes have already been delivered of Stanton's personal files. My guest today, researcher Grant Cameron. Grant has been scouring the files now residing at the archive, discovering letters, photographs, and even a piece of metal from the Roswell crash site. He's here to go over what he has found thus far. Stay tuned, as we are about to enter inside the Black Vault. That's right, everyone. As always, thank you so much for joining me on this journey inside the Black Vault. Today, we're talking about the treasure trove of information hidden within the files of the late Stanton Friedman. Joining me today, world-renowned researcher and legend, Grant Cameron. He's been scouring the files for the past few weeks. Grant, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to speak with us about what you're finding.
Well, thanks, John, for having me, and I appreciate you're doing the interview as you're the other document guy. There's not too many document people around, so I appreciate talking to someone who actually knows what they're talking about when it comes to documents.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I appreciate the compliment. It's great to have you. There's so much that I can talk to you about, just simply because you have a wealth of knowledge on quite a few different angles on this. But why I wanted to bring you on today was to really speak about the Stanton Friedman files. Now, before we get into what you've been kind of going through, I know you've been posting a few things you found on social media. We all know who Stanton Friedman is, but can you explain what this archive entails? Where is it? And how did this all come to be?
Okay. Stanton used to live in California, and he moved in 1980 to Fredericton, New Brunswick, which is right on the east coast of Canada. His wife was originally from New Brunswick. They moved back there, and Stanton accumulated a massive collection of material. And he actually made arrangements before he died to have this material. In fact, I think half of the material was actually moved from his house before he died. So I posted one photo that shows what there's involved there. There's a pallet of boxes that came in when I was there, and it's an entire pallet full of these boxes. And she said, what we have is 15 times that. So this was a massive collection of material that Stan had collected. He started, I believe, in 1958. So he'd done 61 years of research, and it looked like Stan never threw anything out. And he had all this material. It was 3 rooms in his basement. The entire basement was taken up. His wife, we always knew, had no interest. Even the archivist, who was Joanna, who I give her total credit, because she took on the job of getting this collection. And she pointed out to me when I was there, she took me for a tour to the backside and how it all works and stuff and what they were doing. she pointed out the fact that there was some, not backlash, but this was not a collection that they really wanted there, because what it is that the Provincial Archives, so we have provinces here in Canada instead of states, so the Provincial Archives, and basically what they have there is a bunch of stuff. If you want to find out, some property that was sold 100 years ago, or church records, or birth, death, wedding records, all this kind of stuff. They have all this stuff, and it's a massive collection of files, but it's basically that kind of stuff. They have no UFO files. They have none of these really weird types of files. So number one, it's not the kind of files that they really normally take. And the other thing was, Stan was not from New Brunswick. He was not a native New Brunswick guy. So there was a bit of, talking that had to be done to convince him that we should actually do a guy who was actually an American, who his files. So she made the effort to get these files. And as she pointed out to me, they have 3 archivists working full-time on this, plus they have some interns working on it. So if you go, I think it was yesterday, I don't know if you've seen it yet, there's an article by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation that did an article on the archives. And they actually have like an 8-minute interview where they interviewed 2 of the archivists, not the archivists, 2 of the interns that are working on Stan's files, and what kind of stuff and what it's like to work in an archives and stuff like that. So they have 3 archivists, and she said to me a couple of years at least. She told one researcher 10 years. And
Wow.
so you got to consider 3 full-time archivists. There's a lot of bucks that they're putting in. And
Yeah.
this, as I said, is a completely different collection than anything they've got in there. And so when I asked her, I said, well, are you going to put this stuff online, or what are you going to do? And she basically said, no, we're not set up for this. This is not what we do. They wanted to save this. So I give them credit to spend what would be probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this collection, because the way she described it, and it's in the CBC article, so I can sort of, and she told me that Stan probably wouldn't object to this. Stan was not a filer, Stan was a piler, or something she called it. And so basically, there was 22 boxes that I went through. No, there's 22 boxes. I went through 15 of them. Those were the things that were in files, in filing cabinets. The vast majority of the collection, I don't know what percentage, it'd be very high percentage of the stuff, is stacks of paper. And so it was all this paper stacked up, as high as people all around these different rooms and stuff like that. And she had said to Stan, like, Stan, you didn't file this stuff. And, she was like, what's, and he said, I didn't have a secretary, and he was basically defending the fact they had these piles of paper. So they've got this. And so when you look at this, when she talks about this 2-year period or 10-year period that it's going to take to file this stuff, the stuff that's in folders, that was in file folders, that was in the filing cabinets, has been put into archives boxes, and they had to redo a lot of the file folders, and there was some mold on some stuff, so they have to do this procedure where they get rid of all this mold and stuff, because it was in the basement.
Wow.
And you basically have this situation where they have to go through the material page by page. It's not filed. So it's like you're going to have a Phil Class letter, and then a letter on ATIP, or a letter on MJ-12 or Bob Lazar. And and in the article, I think they say each piece of paper will be handled 5 or 6 times before it's actually finally put into the proper file. So I've given them an index, because the other thing you have with Joanna, and I give her credit, that these people know nothing about UFOs. They have it was just, he was a very sort of famous guy in town, and they decided they needed to get this collection. So they started before he was done, and they went in there, and as I said, Stan collected everything. So they would do, they did an oral history, which they're going to provide to me, and I will make it public. And this was, they do these at Presidential Archives, where if you're the chef of the president, they want to know what it was like to be the chef. Did the president ever steal food at 3 o'clock in the morning? What was his favorite food? All these stupid questions. So they did this long oral history with Stan just before he died. And it probably is the last interview he ever did. So they did this interview, and they've processed that. So they also have an audio visual. So Stan has, in part of the collection, is all the audio visual material that he had, which is like Merv Griffin in the 1960s, these old tapes from the 1960s that Stan collected everything. So they're going to actually reproduce all this material. They're going to digitalize all the audio, all the video material, and Stan taped a lot of his phone calls. So they've got a massive pile of that stuff. And then I also talked to them to tell you the extent of this collection. They got the 15 pallets. But she also told me that Stan's computer had crashed, and I knew this. Before he had died, his computer had crashed, And so they went and they got a guy and they recovered the material from the computer. So that, in addition, a lot of the material is going to be on the computer. The material I looked at was all stuff out of the 1980s. There was nothing new, nothing up to date stuff. So that'll all be on the computer, because as you know, you knew Stan. Stan was an old time guy. I mean, everything was on paper. He was the last guy to actually go into PowerPoint. He was still doing slides. He would go to the conference and he'd say, I need my slide projector, and it'd be everybody doing PowerPoint except for Stan. He was an old school guy. And so that's to our advantage, because a lot of the stuff was recorded, all the paper material, all of the correspondence that he did with people, and even the stuff where they've got these notes. And you probably do the same thing, where you have a little scrap of paper and you put somebody's phone number on it, and then you end up with these pile of paper, these pieces of scrap. She said, what do you want me to do with this stuff? And I said, well, keep it. I'll go through it. I'll flip through these little pieces of paper. You never know what's going to be on
just randomly start calling people, Grant. Just see who they are and how they knew them. Let me jump in really quick.
The massive job. You cannot believe the job they've got. They've got the table. I posted the picture of the table. They've got this table where they put these sort of documents, and they try to put them into Stan's friends and foes, newsletters, and they're trying to sort this stuff out, but they have no background in ufology. So I gave them a word index as to topics that Stan was interested in, different names to look for. And I even mentioned Phil Klass, and I said, oh yeah, we know Phil Klass. We know that one already. Yeah. And she was talking about the correspondence with Phil Klass, because I don't know if you know, like, I went to see Phil Klass's collection a number of years ago, and I discovered that he had this, it was a big collection, but it wasn't massive, a big collection. And he had correspondence with everybody except for Stanton Friedman. And we knew that they had fought for years with these emails letters going back and forth. And so I remember when Stan found out that there was nothing there, he said, well, I'll tell you what, I've got his correspondence. That was one of the reasons I went there. It was to get this correspondence between him and Phil Klass. Now it's scattered in all different files and stuff, and it's going to have to be put together. But the archivist said, yeah, I know that's Phil Klass guy. I know that guy. And she said, man, those guys were so witty. She was just intrigued, because it was Bill Moore and Stan and Phil Klass during the 1980s on the MJ-12 thing. And they were shooting this stuff back and forth, and these little one-line barbs against each other. It was really interesting reading.
I've seen some of the material that Phil sent some other researchers. It's fairly strongly worded. That guy did not hold back. Let me ask you, before we get into some of the material that you are going through and seeing, very quickly, is this just open to everyone? Is this just you've made special arrangements?
They were very, very accommodating. In fact, at one point she said to me, she says, well, she mentioned this fact that this is going to take years to go through, because it's all, she showed the boxes, and I've actually got some photographs of like an archives box just full of paper. It's not filed. And so it's a long job. And so she said, when Stan died, I immediately heard that he had moved these records. And so I found out where they were. I thought they were at the university, but they turned out to be the Provincial Archives. And so when I contacted her, people always think that archivists are these guys who are trying to cover up stuff. And I know you were at the Kennedy Library, and my experience, I've done 35 archives trips to maybe 25 different archives. And archives people are just like real historic people. They're just like, wow, they're just into the thing. And they go, UFOs, you're working on UFOs, and they're really helpful. So when I first contacted her, she said, well, she described this problem, that most of the stuff is not filed. She says, so if you want to come, you can come through here and you can poke through the boxes if you want. They were actually going to let me just poke through these boxes, but it would have been a total waste of time, because what I did when I went there, there's so much material. You cannot believe how much material there is. So what I did was I did it with the camera. So I would take the box, I would look at the file folder, and I'd take a look at it. And if it looked interesting, I would photograph everything. There's no time to read anything. And even then, I stood for 47 hours in one spot with a camera, just click, 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 as fast as I could turn the pages on these documents to try to get everything. I could read it when I get home. So most of the stuff I haven't read. There's probably 90+% of the stuff I haven't read. I just photographed all this stuff. The same as I did when I went to the Clinton Library. There was again, there was about 10,000 pages that were recovered from the Clinton Library. And again, that stuff I haven't even read yet. So it's still a long process, even though I've got it, and they're still working through it. And any questions that I give to her, she's very respectful. She sends me immediately. There was actually if you look at the CBC article, the news article that came out yesterday, you'll see a photograph of a field with some cows in it, with 5 UFOs flying around in the background. And so I said to her, I said, it looked kind of hokey to me. And I said, where did this photograph come from? Can you send me the actual digital copy of the photo rather than the ones in the newspaper? So immediately today already, she sent it back, plus the letter of the guy who actually sent it. And it's a photograph from Orillia, north of Orillia, Ontario, taken in 1982 by a guy who sends it to Stanton in 1984. And this is before Photoshop. This is a guy who worked for a TV station. He was a TV photographer for a TV station. And so they're very good in terms of, I asked them, they actually sent me like an index of all the folders they had done and anything I want. And I found this with all archives, not just here at the New Brunswick Provincial Archives, but every archives I've been to, people are more than helpful to try to help you find what you're looking for. They're just very interested. They're historical people. They're really into subjects, and they're just as interested in finding out what's going on. But they won't violate any clearance. Like if it's it's a secret document, they're not going to give you that stuff. But in terms of what's there, I mean, I remember going to the Carter Library where one of the archivists at the Carter Library actually went to school with Chip Carter, and he said that Chip Carter had told him the story about the Jimmy Carter's UFO sighting. Mm-hmm. So he was really into this stuff. I mean, I remember he and I were in the archives an hour and a half after the archives closed talking about UFOs. I mean, some of these people are really into this subject, and they will help you answer questions, direct you where you need to go. And so I have nothing but high praise for the people that are putting this collection together.
Yeah, it's one thing I've noticed about archivists versus FOIA officers is that archivists are very genuinely interested in helping, and FOIA officers, for the most part, they try and help, but they certainly don't go out of their way like the archivists do. So it's always a lot of fun to go to the Presidential Archives and up there. Let me ask you real quick, have you seen, like when you first started going through these boxes, I mean, obviously you're taking a look at decades and decades worth of research. Obviously you have done the same, but you're seeing somebody else's work. Was anything surprising to you? Did anything stick out and you scratch your head, or were you amazed, or was this just like anybody else that was researching a paranormal topic?
Stan, well, you knew Stan, I knew Stan. There was nothing, people always have these, like this conspiracy story started. He worked for the government and stuff like that, and all these, crazy theories. And I found he was just like any other researcher. Like if you meet a researcher face to face and you see their stuff, you realize the guy's, he may be deluded on some idea or belief he has, but basically Stan, everything that's in Stan's files was basically Stan Friedman. There was a lot of fight against, articles about skeptics and the MJ-12 thing and the defense. There was a couple of surprising things I found, but I was actually going there to find certain material. Because that's the way I work. The way I work is, and I've done a lot of the major collections of researchers. And the way it works to me is, and I know with my collection, and you can probably verify this, that from time to time, someone will give you something and you can't really go public with it. You sort of, you put it on, you write it down, you stick it in a file, and then you sort of forget about it. And then you die. And I'm like the vulture. Like I go there and I go, I wonder what Stan, so what I was looking for was certain things that I knew Stan had been involved with. And the main thing was the MJ-12, because I was there. I was there with Bill Moore. I was there with Stan Friedman. I was there when the MJ-12 thing was unraveling. And what I wanted to see was the correspondence between Stan Friedman and Bill Moore. What were they talking about behind the scenes? And Jamie Chandray and Robert Collins, and whether he talked to Kit Green and all this kind of stuff. So I was looking for that. And the other thing I was looking for was a case that I knew that Stan had been involved with. And that was the famous Cuban case from 1967, where the Cuban jet is picked up by the NSA or out of this naval base in Florida, where they pick up this communication. Now that I found, they had filed some of that. Now some of that's going to be in another file that they haven't done, like the audio stuff and stuff like that. But I did find that. And that was kind of surprising when I actually saw who the source was. And Stan had given this guy, confidentiality agreement and stuff like that. So I actually saw the background to that kind of stuff. That was really interesting where you see that kind of stuff. And but most of the stuff was typical Stanton Friedman. Yeah. It was extensive amounts of correspondence with people, but there was really nothing that was really like, oh, I didn't believe Stan believed that or whatever. Like there was hundreds of pages on Area 51. Bob Lazar. He hated that story. He was after Bob Lazar. So everything was there. The court records were there. The agreement with Bigelow, the research he had done on the degrees, everything. Stan had piles and piles and piles of material. It was all there. But that was where Stan was. He had a position. He knew what his position was. There was really, in terms of him working for the government or something really secret, there was nothing like that. It was just same Stan Friedman.
So no pay stubs from the CIA for Stanton Friedman, huh? You didn't stumble.
No.
Let me ask you on the Bob Lazar thing, and then I want to go back to the MJ-12 subject that you were looking for. Bob Lazar obviously is a hot topic right now. I don't think I've ever asked you this personally, Grant Cameron, not based off of Stanton Friedman's files. Very quick, yes or no? Do you believe in Bob's story?
I believe Bob was on the base. Yes, I believe it was a setup. I've always had this theory that they are doing the plausible deniability. I did the story when it broke. I wrote that story up in 1990, and George Knapp actually bought a couple of the books I wrote in a later book, where he said it was the most accurate version he'd seen based upon what he'd done. And he sort of came to the same idea that Bob Lazar didn't have the degrees that he said he had. But if you look at the interview, when he was interviewed for EG&G, he had said this first interview the first question in the second interview was, what's your relationship to John Lear and what do you think about him? So before he went on the base, they knew he knew John Lear. And the whole idea was they were going to take him and show him a bunch of stuff. Like the second day, he reports seeing 125 documents where they tell him the whole program, all these documents. In a need to know program, he's not going to do that. So they're feeding him material. That was my idea. They put him on and they wanted him to tell John Lear. And on December 6, 1989, he went to John Lear and he told John Lear, I was there, I was on the base. And he told him all this stuff. And they wanted John Lear to carry the story because nobody's going to believe John Lear. The story will get out, but nobody will believe the story.
Wait. Let me ask you. So you're saying that the government or the military kind of orchestrated this whole thing?
Yeah, that's my belief.
So the story is true, but they won't.
Why would he know the test? For example, we know for a fact that he took Lear, Huff, all these guys out to watch this test on the Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, 3 weeks in a row. And why would he know where the test is? Why would they tell him where the test is? He wasn't involved. He was a part-time guy. He was only on the base a couple of days. He was not a full-time guy. That's why he took John Lear. He got frustrated because they wouldn't bring him onto the base. So they were setting him up. And when he gets caught, when they take him to Indian Springs and put a gun to his head and say, when we told you this was top secret, I didn't mean to bring your friends and to show them the test. Why did they not arrest him? Why did they not suspend it? Why did they not kill his security clearance? All they did was suspend his security clearance. They invited him back to the base. It was Bob Lazar who wouldn't go back to the base. They didn't do anything to him. And that, to me, everything indicated that he was a setup. They wanted him to tell the story to John Lear. The way the thing went bad is that when he wasn't being brought up to the base anymore, George Knapp has this one interview. He's missing this interview on this 5 o'clock news. And he says to John Lear, you got that guy that said he was up at Area 51. Bring him in here. We need an interview tonight. That's when they backlight him. They call him Dennis, and the story goes viral. That the Air Force didn't anticipate. It wasn't no longer John Lear, who nobody believed. Now it was George Knapp telling the story, and the story went viral, and they had to take back the land to move people farther away. So I firmly believe that they wanted the story out, almost like for example, one of the stories that he told was the John Lear story. It was the story about the underground shootout, that he was shown a document that said there was an underground shootout, 64 special forces killed, and it happened at Area 51. Well, the former story that was being leaked to John Lear was it happened at Dulce Base. So you see they're repeating the stories. They're just doing this sort of thing. And that was my impression that, he was on the base and they knew it would blow up. They knew he would get exposed. So everybody would say, John Lear's telling the story about Area 51 UFOs. It's all garbage. Because what people got to remember is George Knapp had 24 other witnesses. And one of the witnesses, he got very upset at me because I actually knew the guy's name. George told me the guy's name. This is the guy that George set up. So I knew that it was not just Lazar. There was actually 24 plus people that were telling bits and pieces of the story. So I rely more on George Knapp's fact that he did this whole thing and tracked all these people down. And the 6 people that got threatened, the woman that was, when they moved the stuff into Area 51 from Wright-Patterson, there was a steno woman that was so scared when they threatened her. George told me these stories about these people that were threatened. He told me who they were, how the threats came in and stuff like that. And that adds some reliability to the story. So the story's not based to me on Lazar. Lazar was a pawn in a game, and I believe they do this over and over again. And that gives, let's go back to a record that I found in Stanton Friedman's files.
Okay.
One of the things I was never able to verify was that in 1989, a guy by the name of Ward Kimball went to the MUFON conference and showed a documentary from 1956 that Walt Disney, he said Walt Disney had been set up to do a UFO documentary for the military, and that they had offered him film and photographs, the same as they did to Bob Emmenegger in the 1970s, and that when it came to the end of the documentary, they told Disney, no, we can't give you the film and stuff, but go ahead with the documentary, and they pull all the film back, the hard evidence. And this film was shown at the 1979 MUFON conference, but I could never confirm it because it was not in the proceedings. In Stan's files, I find it from up till 9 o'clock. J. Allen Hynek was speaking at 9:10. Ward Kimball comes out, and Ward Kimball shows this documentary that was pulled from 1956 with Disney, and then Stanton Friedman goes on at 9:45, and it confirmed this story. And one of the things that ties into this alien autopsy document, that one of the stories that was told in this alien autopsy thing was that in the 1970s, a guy by the name of Mike Maloney, who was a top photographer in Great Britain, had stated that he had seen the alien autopsy document in the 1970s, and that he had been at the Disney Corporation, and that somebody had taken him to a private house and showed him the video, and that the video was exactly the same alien, except that there was a live alien in the shot. And as soon as I heard that, I said, that was Ward Kimball showed him that video, because he had gone after Bob Emmenegger. He had been involved in the 1975 UFOs, past, present, and future. And so when I was doing the alien autopsy, that whole dispute thing, I went to Phil Mantle, and Phil Mantle confirmed that he had talked to Maloney. And yes, it was Ward Kimball who actually showed him that claimed that he'd showed him that video. So you get these sort of backups. That was one of the more interesting things I found, was this confirmation that there was this documentary that was done by Disney in 1956 and was shown at the MUFON conference in 1979. And nobody can remember, like Stan said, he talked to Ward Kimball, but it was an interesting, and that's the kind of thing where I go in and I realize when you go into a document collection that there's going to be something there that somebody forgot to destroy, that they didn't realize was in there, or it was confidential or whatever. And you find these interesting things that confirm stories that I've been working on for decades.
I mean, I'm going to have you back and have a bigger discussion about Lazar. I've always had a problem with the story. It's no secret to those watching and listening to this program. I struggle on many facets of it, but without turning this into the Lazar show, I do kind of want to ask you then about this pile of files that Stanton had on Lazar. He was obviously a meticulous researcher. I didn't necessarily agree with 100% of everything that he concluded, and Stanton knew that. But with Lazar, he put up a conclusive case, in my book, that Lazar just was not who he says he was. But talking to you and the research you've done, you feel there's a much bigger story here.
Yeah, I agree. Lazar was not who he said he was.
Okay.
But in Stanton's files, one of the things that I did find was the fact that Lazar had written to Los Alamos asking for his files. I put that up.
Yeah, you did.
So if he was faking it, why would he write a letter to Los Alamos asking for his file? And they come back and say, you don't have a file, we don't have it. And then they find his record, and I produced that as well, his record that he was in the phone book there.
Yeah.
And that George Knapp tells the story that when he took the crew to Los Alamos, he said he was like a rabbit going through his lair. He was going from building to building. And he said it was quite evident Lazar knew his way around Los Alamos. He was not some guy they just let him walk right through. So, and that's the kind of thing you find in these things. That does make sense. If he was faking the whole thing, why would he write this letter to Los Alamos asking for his file?
I was surprised to see that, to be honest with you, but I mean, let's be fair. It could have been part of a cover story, meaning, hey, what are they going to do? Say no, they're not going to arrest him. So he'll get the letter that denies it, and then he can pave the way to say, aha, they're covering it up. It's a identity, erasing of my identity, and so on. So I was surprised to see that because I had never heard that he did that. But in the same respect, I would say that, it could have been part of a cover story, I guess.
Well, I understand the problem with Lazar. I mean, there's the background for sure. He didn't have the degrees. The all the Stan put up, I don't disagree with anything Stan has. It's just my take was all these things about the other 24 witnesses, him knowing when the test was, the fact that he got on the base, that he phones Teller and he's on the base like within a couple of weeks. I mean, you don't get a top secret security clearance in a couple of weeks. How does he get on the base so fast? And they put him on there, and then they don't really bring him in. They only bring him in a couple of days. That's why this W-2 form or whatever it was only had a couple $100 on it, because he was not a full-time guy. And that was, if you go back to the research that was done by Timothy Good interviewed him at the time, and that came out that he was only on the base a couple of days, that they were just feeding him this stuff, and they knew he was going back to John Lear, and this was confirmed later that they had the phone conversation, they had all his phone conversations taped, so they knew that he was feeding it to Lear. And Lear was the crazy guy in the 1980s. He was on the underground bases, and they're going to steal your soul and take it to the moon and all this kind of stuff. And that's what they do, is you have to have a witness that's going to fall apart in order, because if you want to disclose, John, I say you either have a thing where you keep quiet and don't talk about it, or you have it in a situation where you give it to somebody who's not reliable. If you wanted to disclose the UFO story, you'd stand the president up and do it. So they're not disclosing, they're not covering up, they're doing something in between. They're giving it to bad witnesses who they know the story is going to fall apart, and they're leaking this material indirectly. Even with if you follow Dolan's thing, where he's talking to Kit Green. Kit Green talks about, he claims there's this program where they're actually setting up him, where they're feeding him phony material, and they're trying to get him to put this stuff out. And you get a high-level guy that ran the Weird Desk or whatever, who's still under contract with the CIA, who has this top secret SCI clearance since 1969, that he's claiming they've got this program. That makes sense to me. If you want to slowly leak the story, you leak it in this way where it's plausible deniability all the time. That's the bottom line. If you want to keep it quiet, you just shut up and quit talking about it, like in Canada, or you make it, you disclose. They're not doing that. They're doing this weird sort of half true, half false thing. And I've always believed that.
It's interesting, and I want to move on to MJ-12, but the one thing I'll go back to about the security clearance of Bob Lazar, it's really interesting because if Stanton was still here, I could envision him saying pretty much identically what you just said about a security clearance. How do you get a security clearance that fast? But that was his end mark. So it's interesting to me because just from kind of an outside point of view, I've never spent a lot of time on Bob Lazar. I feel confident I've spent enough to come up to a conclusion, but that's, my own. But that being said, it's like for him, that was a big argument, that how do you get a security clearance that fast? You can't. And Stanton was one that had a security clearance. And it's interesting to hear your take. You think that he actually did get it. It was fast-tracked, and he got onto the base. So it's kind of interesting to hear the two interpretations on that. With MJ-12, there's obviously a lot of rumors about this. Stanton did a lot of research on it. You said you were looking for the conversations, or the communications, I should say, between Bill Moore, Chandray, and Stanton Friedman. Did you end up finding them, and what, if anything, did it reveal?
That was one of the surprises that I got. As you know, the background, Bill Moore writes the Roswell book, and I say that's the key part, is you have a major figure, and he's making millions of dollars on this book. It sold huge books, overseas rights, all this kind of stuff. And a couple days after, he gets contacted first by Richard Doty, and then he gets contacted by this Roland B. Evans, who was a guy out of Offutt Air Force Base. That's the two guys that contact him and say, the only guy who knows what you're talking about. So this is, again, it's a setup where and they told him right from the word go, we're going to give you some stuff that's true and some stuff that's false, and you're going to have to figure it out. And Bill Moore said, "Oh, I'm the smart guy. I can separate the wheat from the chaff. Don't worry about it. I can figure out what's real and what's not real." So they were doing this thing. So he first brings in Bob Pratt, and they write this book called the Aquarius Memo, and it never gets published. Then you see that he's going to do a book with Stanton Friedman. And what I found was that when the document was mailed, it was mailed to Jamie Chandray, because Bill Moore said Jamie Chandray was CIA. He had a CIA back. So that's why the document went to him. It didn't go to Bill Moore. They sent it to him. And what I realized when I looked at Stan's correspondence, now I haven't looked through all of it yet, but when I looked through the correspondence, what I saw was Stan was very upset, but he was mostly upset about the fact that he had discovered the Roswell. He had discovered Jesse Marcel Sr., and he didn't get a credit in the book. He didn't get a part of the royalties, this huge amount of money they made on the Roswell incident book. And he was really upset about this, that he had trusted Bill Moore, but it had to do with this book thing, about the money thing. And so what happened was there was one correspondence between Bill or Stan references in one correspondence. He said, and he wouldn't show me the document. So when they got the document in the mail, this is December of 1984, then they tell Stan, but Stan is now on the other side of the country. And he says, show me the document. And Bill Moore says, I can't, it's too risky to send you the document. So it looks like Stan never saw the MJ-12 document until they went live with it in June of 1987 at the MUFON conference in Washington. So he got sort of sideswept by this document that he never got. And what he complained about is they didn't do the right research. They wouldn't show me the document. But he buys into the document, and because he sees Menzel's name on the document, and he's arguing with Menzel, and he starts to do the research after it. But that was what surprised me, that I don't think he saw the document until maybe just before they went live with it. And the way it went live was that the Falcon had gone to Bill Moore and said it's going to be released in Great Britain. So what they had done to force the document out is they'd gone to Timothy Good. And Timothy Good was putting in the book above top secret. So Bill had to go live with the document. It was either you go live with the document and take credit for it, or you let Tim Good take credit for the document. So they forced the issue. They put the document out, and that's most of the correspondence I saw. But he was very upset with Bill Moore at the end. They tried to patch things up in 1991 at the St. Louis conference. But Stan would say about Bill Moore, the guy always wanted to be on the inside. He wanted to be secretive. He thought he was so smart. And he was really angry at Bill for playing this sort of game with the intelligence people. Because Bill Moore is just the first version of Tom DeLonge. Mm-hmm. Tom DeLonge's got 24 sources. They come to Tom DeLonge. He gives them his little pitch. I think I can do this. Okay, well, I think we can help you. And they send him to these various people, and they give him all these people to help him. Bill Moore was the same thing. They went to Bill Moore and said, "You're the only guy who knows what you're talking about." And Bill said, "Yeah." And then they start feeding him these guys, these various people. And it was Robert Collins who helped put this group together. Richard Doty, Robert Collins, Hal Puthoff, John Alexander. The rumors was they had Richard Helms, Robert Gates. There was all these rumors of names that were involved in this thing. And it's the same thing where they're running this operation where it's plausible deniability. And so Stan sort of got taken, and he was very angry. I'll publish some of the letters from about 1991 where he goes through Bill Moore through about 15 different things. I trusted him. I shouldn't have trusted him. And then another thing, I should have trusted him. I didn't, and he was really angry about what Bill had done. And Stan did take a hit on the MJ-12 document, because my position on the MJ-12 document is the same thing. The MJ-12 document is altered, phony, whatever you want to call it. The same as the documents in the 1990s that were released to Timothy Cooper. Now, Timothy Cooper, people say, it's Richard Doty in the basement. There was 3,700 pages of MJ-12 documents. There was a lot of documents being leaked. This is not Richard Doty. This is an operation. And if you look at when you guys were doing the thing with the ATIP thing, you see that Tim Cooper filed an FOIA on the ATIP thing, and he references this program. And I went on Facebook and said, anybody know what this program is? He's still filing FOIAs. So it's all these people are pawns in the game. So my position is that the MJ-12 thing is a real deal, because what happened to us is a couple of weeks after that document went public, a guy by the name of Bill Steinman from California, and he was good friends with Bill Moore. He was a really aggressive researcher, wasn't afraid of anybody, actually goes to Dr. Eric Walker. And he goes to Walker and he says, "You were at this briefing at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base." And Walker said, "I was there, so what?" And then he said, "I've got this document, this MJ-12 document." And Walker says, he cuts him off. He says, "Look, I've known of them for 40 years. This is 1987 interview. I've known of them for 40 years. Leave it alone. You're up against the windmills. You're wasting your time." And so from the word go, from 2 weeks after the MJ-12 document went public, I knew that Walker had said, "I've known of them for 40 years. So my position was the same as the Lazar thing. The story was true. There was truth to the story, but they were giving it to, they're doing this plausible deniability thing that nobody could confirm the story. Because if they want to confirm the story, they can confirm the story anytime they want. And they shouldn't be leaking it. If it's like in Canada, they shouldn't be leaking this kind of stuff.
There were two questions that came in on social media about this very topic that a couple people wanted me to ask you. One of which was, and I didn't know if this was true or not, it didn't ring a bell, not that that means much, but there was talk that Bill Moore had eventually went to a MUFON meeting, got up in front of everybody and said that the whole thing was a hoax. Is there truth to that?
Well, yeah, that's the famous 1989 speech at Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. So what happened there was that thing was going to be run by John Lear, because John Lear was then famous. John Lear was going to run the MUFON conference, and he was going to bring in Bill Cooper and all these crazy, speakers. He was going to bring them in, and MUFON conference said, "No, you're not bringing these speakers in." He said, "Yeah, I am." So they said, "You're no longer state director for MUFON," and they pulled it. So Bill Moore ran his own MUFON conference down the road, and he said he drew more than the MUFON conference. So Bill Moore gets up there, and Bill Moore said it was the only time he ever read a speech. It was basically approved by whoever was behind this operation, and he read the speech. And what he said is, you people, all this stuff about underground bases, you people are being used. I was on the program. I know what they were doing. They were running this disinformation. And he admitted to one document. So they say Bill Moore did all this stuff. No, Bill Moore didn't do all this stuff. He was part of the operation. He was watching it. He got one document, and this is how it works. Bill Moore said, they told me part of it would be information, part of it would be disinformation. He was given the Aquarius telex. If you remember, the first time the MJ-12 was referenced was in the Aquarius telex from 1980. He said, I saw the telex before it was altered. And they gave it to me and said, give it to Paul Benowitz. And he took the document to Paul Benowitz. He knew the document had been altered. And I say they're all altered. All the documents are altered. He gave it to him, and he said, I would test this before you put it out. And he said, Benowitz didn't care. Benowitz just put it out. So he was saying that all this stuff is all counterintelligence. They're just playing with you people. I was on the inside. I know this. And so then they say, well, he's on the inside. He knew all this, and he was part of it. But he was saying, no, I wasn't part of it. I was watching them do this. And he said, any good researcher would do it. You get on the inside, and he said, you either play the game. If you don't play the game the way they play the game, you're gone. They don't talk to you anymore. So you go into the program, and he had this ego. He believed, I can separate the wheat from the chaff. So he knew they were doing this operation. And he even said, one of the things he said, that the computer that was given to Paul Benowitz by U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigation was provided by J. Allen Hynek. That's a Bill Moore story, that J. Allen Hynek provided the computer. And he said everybody was in on it. And he never identified, but he was indicating that a lot of researchers were doing the same thing he was. And he just was so arrogant. He stood up, and then people started throwing stuff at him. And then his ego, he couldn't take it. It was sort of like he went from this guy who was charging, $1,200 for a lecture to a guy who couldn't get, a date on Saturday night. And his ego couldn't take it. And he basically pulled out, and he still is on the sidelines, but he sold all his stuff. And he said, I tried to get an interview with him at the very end as he was leaving. He did a couple of interviews in 2004 with Greg Bishop. And then he said, I'm out of this thing. And I went and did an interview, and he said to me, typical Bill Moore, he said, Grant, I never figured it out. I'll pass on the interview. You're never going to figure it out. Give up. And he went off and said, I'm Bill Moore. I could never figure it out. I could never get to the bottom of what they were actually doing. And if I can't, the rest of you guys have no chance of trying to solve it.
A couple minutes ago, you had said some names. I forget the exact context, but you mentioned Hal Puthoff, Kit Green, Richard Doty, and so on, from decades ago.
Yeah.
In your opinion, why are these same names seemingly appearing in all of these highly controversial stories? And why are we seeing kind of this recycling of stories from decades ago, meaning Bob Lazar has gotten a huge resurgence, and it's just going to get another shot in the arm here recently with TTSA's subsidiary publishing company that's, publishing their book. Why are the same names involved? Because again, the names that you mentioned from decades ago are tied to TTSA directly, Hal Puthoff being a co-founder. Richard Doty is obviously going around to conferences and stuff. I've always wanted to talk to him and reach out to him. I don't have any personal like or dislike towards him, but obviously these same names keep appearing over and over. Why is that?
Okay, it goes according to my theory. So they actually started to appear in 1975 with Robert Emenegger. So what they are, they're just like you and I, John, except they ran into the program at some point. They ran into the program, and 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 during their career, they may have been in part, like for example, Kit Green. Kit Green, I was told like 20 years ago, he was a physiologist. So he had UFO material from being at the CIA. He knew little bits and pieces of the story, but he wanted to get read in on the alien autopsy. That was what he was interested in. And he could never get read in on the alien autopsy. Couldn't. And Eric Davis told me that years ago. He couldn't get read in. And so what they are just people like you and I who have had security clearances, who have these contacts, so that you're in a job, and then you run up against other people who have high level security clearances. And so every time there's money or every time there's information, they go to the story. So Bob Emenegger had this inside. He could go inside the Pentagon without signing in, all this stuff. So they were all linking up to him. And they all, when the NIDS thing happened in the 2000s, Eric Davis was talking to me, and I know that they were after, for example, the Holloman Air Force Base story. They were Puthoff and Eric Davis were trying to figure out the Holloman Air Force Base story. Is it true? They were going to bring in Charlotte to talk to. They were doing this investigation and stuff. So they go there, and then along comes Bill Moore, and Bill Moore gets these high-level guys who come to him and say, the only guy who knows who you're talking about, and he has these high-level contacts, and they suddenly realize there's all these people, and it was called, Valet used to call it the Invisible College. Then it was called, Bill Moore called it the Avery. Now it's called the Cosmic Club. And Jim Semivan says there's at least 50 people in this thing. So there are people on the sidelines. So when Tom DeLonge comes along, and Tom DeLonge's got money and he's got power and stuff, everybody just sort of gravitates to go, oh, do you see this? The government's talking to Tom DeLonge. Let's go see. There may be money, there may be information. So they gravitate. So they went to the Avery for Bill Moore. Then when John Alexander had the Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group with 20 people, they were all there because, oh, John's having this meeting. Let's go. Maybe we'll learn something. Maybe there'll be some money. Maybe there'll be some funding. So they go to that thing. Then along comes NIDS. So they all join NIDS because he's paying big time money. I won't say what it was, but these guys were being called in. The Avery guys were making huge per diems by Bob Bigelow. So they bring in and say, come on, Bob's got money. We're talking about these subjects. We're talking to these other people. And they used to call it the bird chatter. So they would have these, and at one point, I actually saw some of these emails. They would talk to themselves among each other because they were high level guys. I can trust you because you got a security clearance. You may know something I don't know. They're just at a higher level than you and I, and they're talking. So they went to the NIDS. Then when Joe Firmage came along and he had millions of dollars and he got into it, they all joined Joe Firmage's organization because he's got money and he may have information. And then when that folds, then they go to the ASAP thing. They realize there's money there. Then Tom DeLonge comes along. They realize there's information and money there. And they just gravitate to wherever they think there's information or money.
Let me jump in and ask you, should I be reading into your quite frequent references to money? Is this that's
the bottom line. Yeah.
Which is
that's
fine.
What I say is
I'm just surprised to hear you say it.
That's what I say is the bottom line to this whole TTSA thing. If you've followed Melinda Leslie, Jim Semivan is only talking to her. I knew this interview. I knew how the interview got set up. She said, what do you want to ask Jim Semivan? I asked, is it constitutional? Is this something that you're actually running by government regulation, or are you guys a bunch of rogue guys who are violating the Constitution? And he said, no, it's constitutional. The other thing I asked is, why is Ron Pandolfi denying you? So those are my two questions. But in the thing, she said to him, she said, okay, Jim, when I talk to you, when it's on the record, it's all on the record. You tell me when it's off the record and I won't talk about it. Is that understood? He said, yeah. She says, what would really get you upset, Jim? What would stop you from talking to me ever again? And he said, mess with the money. She says, what do you mean? Don't mess with the money. And the whole deal was they're going to Congress. So the whole disclosure thing to me is what's happening now, my personal opinion. In order to get money from Congress, because they ran the whole operation with Joe Firmage, they were trying to get money. So they were going after guys like Charles Bombardier in Canada, a billionaire. They were going after this guy with this chicken place in the United States. They were going after Firmage, had a lot of money. And they were trying to finance this UFO research thing with using billionaires. And it didn't really work. So then suddenly Tom DeLonge comes along and they decide we're going after Fort Knox now. We're going after Congress because they got a $730 billion defense budget. Nobody's going to miss a couple of $1 billion. But in order to get the money from Congress, because if you go back to the Obama days, the big show in town was not Tom DeLonge, it was Leslie Kean. You read Leslie Kean's book, she said she was working with Podesta, and the big shtick then was, oh, it's going to interfere with commercial airline traffic. And I guess the Congress people went, get out of here, like, you're crazy. And it didn't go anywhere. So number one, so if you want the thing, you've got to do the disclosure thing, because you're not going to get any money from Congress unless they believe there's actually a UFO phenomena. So you do the whole thing, you do the disclosure thing, and then you turn it and you do the national security thing. This is a threat to national security. The Russians may get it, the Chinese may get it, and they're going after the money. So that's what Semivan said. He said it 4 times. Don't mess with the money. They're going for funding from Congress, and everybody's going to walk out with a suitcase full of money. They're going to get the money because they can no longer get it from these billionaire guys. So they got it, and it looks like they're going to get the money. It looks like this thing is going to work. That's what Semivan said. Just don't mess with the money. I believe it's all about money out of Congress.
So is this money to line their pockets and have a retirement and they're greedy, or is this money because they genuinely have an interest in solving this mystery?
Oh, that I don't know. I mean, I would say you've probably got various things. I mean, everybody's going to make some money because you take a look at the people that are in it. I mean, there's people with patents, with they're working on contractor things. I mean, they're all got vested interest in these sort of things. I'm hoping that they're going to do it just for UFO research, but you can see they're tying in Lockheed Skunk Works and all these different deals. But everybody's still going to be rich, even if you go through Lockheed Skunk Works. It may be honestly a program where they want white world funding into this kind of thing, but still Tom DeLonge's a business guy. Tom DeLonge, his whole thing is telling stories. He's really not a UFO researcher. He's just a guy who says, I've got the lifetime rights for Bob Lazar's story. That's how he framed it like a year ago. I got the lifetime rights for Bob Lazar. It's all about money to him. He gets the Bob Lazar story, controls the Bob. And there was even a thing, and I was involved with someone who was involved in this with TTSA, this thing about the app. Did you hear about the app? They wanted to have this app where they were going to have the app where you phone in and this sort of thing. And you'd say, well, that's pretty good. You know, you phone in your UFO sighting or whatever, but then you end up in a situation where Tom DeLonge now controls all the UFO sighting. So if he happens to get a UFO sighting or a crash or something really spectacular, that's worth money. You cut into the thing and you get all the material coming to you. So Tom DeLonge would have a different interest than, I'm sure the Hal Puthoff is 80 years old. I don't think Hal Puthoff needs the money. I don't think Kit Green needs the money. I think they're honestly interested in trying to figure out whether it's Hal Puthoff and the 0 point energy thing, or whether it's Kit Green getting a briefing on the alien autopsy. They're interested. So there'd be different versions. But the thing is that there's $730 billion defense budget. So they're going to the intelligence and the appropriation and the Senate, the intelligence and armed services. They're not going to NASA. They're not going there, because that's not where the money is. Their budget was cut. They're going where all the money is, in the defense budget. And that's what I believe is going on.
Going back to Stanton Friedman here in the last 10 minutes or so, and his files and what you're going through and that meticulous nature. I've mentioned it not only in this show, but quite a few times in lectures well before he passed away, about really how delicate he was with the truth. I mean, he really dug in. I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what is referred to as the UFO community in this day and age, present company excluded, because you physically go to presidential archives and archives, obviously, that's what our whole conversation is about, and you dig into the information. So present company excluded, it seems like the UFO community and the researchers are not following the lead from people like yourself and Stanton. That it's becoming this field of Google searches and tweets. You know, I mean, like, what is Tom DeLonge going to Instagram out? Is that going to hurt this field in the long run as we get this new breed of researchers that literally, I mean, I hate to say it, but I'm going to. There is a small percentage of followers of TTSA which are very cultist in their belief systems. If you say anything against Tom DeLonge, you are an absolute government shill, and they will come after you viciously. And so I would love to see them funnel that passion into going to an archive or learning from people like yourself, Stanton Friedman's material, and so on, and using that passion in a different way. But it seems like we're losing that. Do you agree? Are we going in the right direction?
I think that it's a little more complex, but I think, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the problems is that the vast majority of it's almost like politics. Everybody wants sort of a leader. So it's like, you're not going to do it for yourself. So everybody's kind of lazy. So it's like, Tom DeLonge's going to do it. Oh, let's cheer on Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge's going to, and Tom DeLonge's got the ego. He can push it. So Tom DeLonge pushes it and everybody jumps on. I think one of the big problems is the nature of 24/7 news now. So what happens is that everybody thinks disclosure's coming and everybody wants disclosure. So everybody's looking for the new story. Nobody's looking back and indexing things and figuring out how does the program actually work? How does the government actually operate? How does SAPS work? How is what's really going on? They're always looking for new stories. So that's what happens when, say, Bob Lazar comes out and someone yells hoax and everybody goes, oh, it's hoax. And everybody runs off to the next story. And we're always looking for the next story. And that's how we're so easily set up, is that I remember I got involved with these two documents that leaked. Okay. So I said to the people there, I said, this story's going to die. It's only going to last so long. People are going to die. And it actually died. And I've laughed. I told people, because it came out, it says, Trump went to North Korea and he stepped across the demilitarized zone and there was a UFO sighting. It turned out to be a flock of birds. And I said, there you go. They're on to the next story already. And so that's why the government can set us up so easy, because everybody's looking for the next video. They figure disclosure is the next story. It's the next video. And you're always looking, and it's so easy to set you up. And it's almost like any other news cycle, is that the story only lasts so long. You get the story and everybody's on to the next story. It's like, I've heard that story before, and you're going through your Facebook and you're looking for a new story. And that's why they set us up. That's why we're never going to get anywhere, is because nobody's really actually putting all the pieces together and figuring out what's really going on. They're just going after the next story.
If it really is all about disclosure, why don't they just disclose? And correct me if I misunderstood you.
Well, I think the whole thing is they've just determined, I guess, by this study from Rand in the 60s, that you've got to do it gradually. You sort of leak it out, and because they could do it. I mean, if there's any sort of truth, they could do it. And I used to believe, I wrote an article called The 64 Reasons They've Decided Not to Tell You the Truth, and I talked about the panic. I don't think so, because you did the story where the Navy, and it went worldwide, where the Navy says, yeah, the films are for real. Nobody jumped off a building. Nobody committed suicide. The stock market didn't melt down. And that's the same thing, is no matter what the disclosure thing is, I think the disclosure's happening because I've changed. One of the big things I've changed in the last year is I really don't think they have anything. And this goes back to, everybody thinks, they've got the gray, they got their reptilian, and they've got an alien, and, it's telling them what to do and whatever, and all these bizarre things. Because it always comes down to what you think is disclosure. So you've got disclosure. The Navy said, yeah, these videos are UFOs. That's disclosure. And I believe that may be all that there is, because one of the things I pointed out, if you see there's this correspondence that happens, these cycles of chains. And one of the chains is with the physicists. So Eric Davis is fighting with Jack Sarfati. Now, these are high-level physicist guys, and Sarfati used to argue with Hal Puthoff about zero-point energy. I'm the smart guy. I know what's going on. And these arguments go back. And Eric Davis, and they had, this little piece of metal that Linda Howe had, the layered piece of metal. Yeah. And Sarfati saying, we hit it with terahertz energy. We could float this thing, whatever. And Eric Davis writes him in this email that's public, says, you're putting together dots that don't actually exist, and you're destroying science. Why don't you go back to consciousness physics? You're just wasting everybody's time, whatever. And so then I'm looking, I'm going, and me and Dolan had a conversation. He said, I think Sarfati's right. I said, you know what? It doesn't matter who's right. If these two top-level physicists, because these are high-level guys, it's a small world, the physics world. If these guys are arguing about how to float a 2-ounce piece of metal off a table, they ain't got nothing. Yeah. And that's what goes back to Joe Firmage. Joe Firmage spent between $20 and $95 million, whatever the figure is, trying to levitate this thing a couple inches off the table. And the guy from Marriott, Dan Marriott, said he will finance it if they can levitate it off a table for so many seconds. So the thing is, they got nothing. Yeah. And so the disclosure may be what you got. It's just simply the fact there's a phenomena. It is controlling the show. We have no idea. There's these stories about they have a craft. They've got bodies, but they don't know how anything works. They can't turn the craft on. They don't know how this thing works. And that was what Eric Davis actually put out publicly. He said they shut the program down in 1989. They could not figure it out, and we still can't figure it out. And that may be, so the disclosure may be simply, yes, UFOs exist. They've got bodies, they've got crafts, but they have no idea how the technology works. They have no idea what they're up against, and they've disclosed already. There is no big disclosure. There is no secret thing that they're going to really show us. They basically told us what they know, which is nothing. And that's where, when you look at what Trump said, where they go in, the Navy goes in and briefs Trump and says, look, we got these videos, the Nimitz videos, and Trump looks and he goes, I don't know if I believe that. And that's why his statement makes sense. He just goes, no, I don't really believe that. Yeah. Hey, maybe that's all they've got is these videos from the Nimitz.
You have time? How are you doing on time? You have a couple minutes for some audience questions? I got some text messages that came in. Sorry, guys, the toll-free number will return. I promise. I didn't think we'd have any time for questions, but we'll do a couple here that came in. Here's the first one. Stanton writes in his paper, Operation Majestic 12, Yes, from August 5th, 1994, on page C6, that Stanton was on a trip to the plains of San Augustine with Don Schmidt and Bob Bigelow prior to December of 1990. Are there other mentions of Stanton with Bigelow in his files?
The only thing, and you got to remember, I haven't read the vast majority, 90% plus. There is one reference where he talks about Bob Bigelow financing him, and this would be about 1990. I didn't really get into what it was financed, but he was doing some sort of interview. It may have been with the last guy, the MJ-12 guy that died. So the last MJ-12 guy dies in the month after they released the document. I think he was doing an interview. It was about that time, but I will release it. But he was financed by Bob Bigelow at one point. That's all the reference I've got. There is some discussion about Stan having insides. Richard Doty tells the story when I interviewed him that and that was one of the things I started was I wanted Stan's FBI file, because I knew that Bill Moore's file had been totally basically withheld, 50 some pages withheld, secret national security. And I had asked Stan, did yours get withheld too? And he said, yeah, they pulled all mine back too. And there's correspondence where Stan knows in 83, he's already under FBI investigation, and he's asking Phil Klass. So I interviewed Richard Doty, and Richard Doty said that Stan had gotten some sort of top secret material, and the FBI was looking at arresting him. And that's what all this exemption stuff is. So there's a lot of stuff where I think you're going to get some interesting revelations. But the Bigelow thing is true. Yeah, he did. There is one reference to the fact that he said something like, I guess I better give him a report or something like that, where he's talking about Bigelow.
I can't believe that somebody actually wrote the FBI speaking about his file and put Stanton's name in as the suspect as the Unabomber.
Oh, that may have been Phil Klass. That would be the kind of stuff Phil Klass would do.
It's funny you say that. I immediately Googled Phil Klass's handwriting to see, because it was a really crazy letter that was written, and Stanton's was the last name there on this short list of Unabomber suspects from whomever this FBI source was.
Klass was always saying you're going to get arrested. You're in Canada. You come back to the States, they're going to arrest you. He kept giving these little jabs about Stan,
Yeah. I'd be curious if it was. if he disguised his writing. There was definitely no match whatsoever. But hey, who knows? And
he would just do it for jokes. Like Klass just liked to crank up. He knew. Even the one time I talked to him, he liked it. He said, "I got Stan going again." He loved it. He liked to crank up Stan and just wind him up.
I met him once on the first lecture I ever did, and the credit that I will give him was that he sat in the second row because the first row had equipment on it, leaning on his walker with a tape recorder, and he taped every single word that I had said in the first big speech I ever gave. And I gave him credit, he was, skeptic in the true sense of the word, but he showed up, and he really went after people, but at least he was there and understood what they were saying. Here's another one real quick. This one's from Red Panda Koala. Remember, guys, if you text in, if you want your name, feel free to sign it off. If not, I just do it as anonymous. Hello, Mr. Greenwald. Hello, Mr. Cameron. Firstly, huge fan of both of you guys and the vast knowledge you guys have on the subject. Thank you for that. My question is, what do you guys make of the Chris Marks Skinwalker Ranch drama that's starting to develop on Twitter regarding Marks saying the security at the ranch were guinea pigs? Are you following that? That's kind of unfolding right now with Skinwalker?
No. Again, this is the thing where people jump from one story to another. We're on to the latest thing. I did watch as you know, I haven't done documents since 2012. I only do it because I figure like there may be something. I love being there. It's like being in King Tut's tomb. You're looking for something. Oh man, I'm gonna find something here. To me, it's an excitement. But I really don't follow documents. But I did follow I do the whole thing about. I'm giving a lecture in Laughlin and Boulder in the next week or two about ports, about things that appear. Experiencers will talk about things that manifest, things flying around the room, all this kind of stuff. And so I was very interested in the Skinwalker Ranch, and I can sort of say there are some documents that may come out on Skinwalker Ranch, but the DIA went in there, and I say they didn't go in there for UFOs. If you look at the evidence, they weren't going. They were going for this thing with the bulls in the trailer, and the woman taking the groceries in and puts the groceries in the shelf and goes in the next room, comes back, and the groceries are back in the bag. It's this apport, this paranormal stuff. It's almost like poltergeist, where things are going through walls and stuff. That's why DIA went to the ranch. And they were trying to discover, and I think there's 20 incidents of this kind of stuff where the post hole digger, they find it disappears and it's up in the tree, and this weird kind of stuff. And so I would say for Skinwalker Ranch, it's really not got much to do with UFOs. It's just a paranormal area that I think has to do with all these curses that these natives were putting on for many years. It's a very weird sort of area. And they were not interested in UFOs when DIA went there.
Here's why I've struggled with the notion that Skinwalker was part of this DIA operation. I could buy that Bigelow put it into his side of it, meaning the contractor side, but I'm not sure how much endorsement there would be from DIA. And this is a genuine question because I've always struggled with this notion. Why would DIA have any interest in that whatsoever? Because that is not in their purview as a military agency. I mean, I could buy the FBI. That one I could buy. If they said that it was a FBI contract and FBI went in there, that I could buy. For domestic intelligence purposes on what's going on, sure, paranormal wise on this ranch in Utah, but it just is outside the purview of the DIA. Can you help me understand why the DIA would want that? Or
well,
finance
I would say it's a defense asset. If you can make portals open, appear in one place and pop out in another place, if you can make stuff disappear, if you can take Putin's bulls and put them in a trailer that's locked, because what it is basically stuff going through walls. That's what it's this principle, like what's really going on. And one of the things, like for example, I was talking this repetition of programs. So Bob Emenegger was contacted in the 70s to do the UFO past, present, future. In the 1983, he was contacted. They said, the government liked what you did. We'd like you to do it again. And they wanted Jacques Vallée in jail and Hynek to come in and do it again. And Vallée and Hynek wouldn't play the game, so that one fell apart. And about 6 or 7 years ago, Bob went back to the military, and they had a bunch of meetings, and it didn't turn out. But what they were going to do is the defense people were going to put him on another contract. And Hal Puthoff in the 1980s had been watching in China these little kids that were able to make stuff levitate, make stuff go through, teleport stuff. And these little kids were doing this, and Hal and the CIA were watching this kind of stuff. And Bob and Alan Sandler were going to go into China, and they were going to do a documentary on this research with telekinesis. So it's the whole idea. It's this idea, if you can move stuff around, if you can make stuff disappear, I mean, this is like ultimate spy type stuff. And they're trying to figure out the principle of the fact that there was these portals. Like if you can do this kind of stuff, and the same as, what's his name? There was always the stories that Ron Pandolfi, he kept putting the portal story out. And so did Joe Firmage, and all these people with this idea is this non-physical aspect to the phenomena, not so much the UFO thing, but what are they really doing? Well, how are they making stuff appear and disappear? And so to me, it would be a very great defense asset if you could develop this kind of technology, the weird stuff that happens at the ranch.
Fair enough. I'm eager to see a little bit more proof and any type of documentation to come out to support that. But I'm interested. I'm definitely following whatever the evidence shows. So last question then for you.
I will just say that Jacques Vallée points this out. They're basically, the one thing was not at Skinwalker Ranch was UFOs. There was maybe one or two orbs. There was no UFOs. So the idea that it was a UFO program, there's really nothing to back that up. If you actually look at what they were looking at, there was no UFOs there.
Yeah, that gets into another rabbit hole because it depends on who you listen to on whether or not OSAP, which was that original contract awarded to Bass, that if it was the same as ATIP. And some people are arguing either way, but what most people don't address is that Luis Elizondo said that they were two separate programs. So therefore, ATIP could potentially be a UFO program, and OSAP, although I don't buy it, could be a paranormal research program. The problem is what's public about it just doesn't fit, meaning it was looking at aircraft projections into the forward, looking into 40 years, looking at lift, propulsion, this and that. And then the reports, the 38 reports generated under that, had nothing really close to do with the paranormal allegations behind that program. But going back to my point, so Mr. Elizondo says that they are two different programs. He says that in his MUFON presentation.
Yeah.
However, Dr. Hal Puthoff says something totally different. He says they're the exact same thing. He says, took a jab at FOIA requesters and said they're never going to find anything asking for ATIP because that wasn't the name. It was OSAP. So they work with each other. I cannot figure out why those two guys have wildly different interpretations of the program. I don't want to keep you all day, but if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, well, I'll add the idea with Bigelow using MUFON, using money to finance MUFON and to buy the ranch. And people don't realize, people always go into this UFO thing, and I say it's way more complex than UFOs. Bigelow had his son die, and he became very interested in contact and stuff like that. And he put up $3.7 billion to the University of Las Vegas, Nevada, for a chair in consciousness studies. So he realizes it's more. That's why he bought the ranch. It wasn't the UFO thing. He was interested in that ranch aspect. And you have the experiencer aspect that John Burroughs talks about using experiencers to drag in the phenomena, because it was known quite clearly that Eric Davis is an experiencer. He had the UFO sighting, clear sighting, when he was doing his graduation, his PhD. And it was when he was on the ranch, it was Eric Davis. Nothing happened with George Knapp. He didn't see anything. Eric Davis, all the stuff was happening at Eric Davis. And they realized there was this potential of these people putting people like Eric Davis or John Burroughs or people in as bait to bring in the phenomena, to study the phenomena. So there was all those other aspects, not just so much the ASAP or ATIP or whatever. It was the fact that Bigelow was involved, and he was doing this side thing where he realized it was all connected. He realized there was this consciousness was involved, and it was this complex thing. And he was maybe just using government money to finance what he thought was connected to UFOs.
That to me is, I think, something that you're starting to get onto, that I would buy into, that this was not necessarily sanctioned by DIA. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but not sanctioned by DIA, but something that Bigelow took funds for and put it into other aspects of something that was
Bigelow
not approved.
had a big implication. That's why I say when it comes to what happened with the New York Times article, I always say you got to go back and look at the interviews people did. And Bob Bigelow does the 2013 interview with George Knapp, and that's when George says, "Are you in favor of disclosure?" "No, I'm not." "Well, what do you want?" We need confirmation. You just go out and you say UFOs are real, and you leave it right there. You stop right there. You don't talk about aliens. That's exactly what they did. And so you see that I think there's a lot more influence on what's going on by Bob Bigelow. He has much more input on what's going on. It's not like Bob Bigelow is a side guy and the government's running it or whatever. I think Bob Bigelow is a major player in terms of even at the idea that his assistant, Cone Kelleher, may have been the assistant with ATIP. There was this story going around that he was basically,
and now he's involved in TTSA.
Yeah, TTSA. So that's the thing, is Bob Bigelow is a much more powerful guy than people think. And that's how I got involved, because I knew Eric Davis back then. I was talking to him in about 2002 when NIDS, and they came and contacted me about Wilbur Smith's anti-gravity stuff in Canada. And they quizzed me about all that stuff. I don't know where they went with it. They were working on that. And then they came to me about the Holloman Air Force Base film, because I'd worked on it. So I knew that NIDS was doing all these different programs. So one week they would do triangles. One meeting, they would have 6 meetings a year. They would bring these guys in for the weekend, and they would tell me stories, these high amount of money, but they wouldn't pay for meals, all these sort of stories. They'd bring them in, and they had triangles, and they would work on cattle mutilations. They would work on these different subjects. And Bigelow was the guy behind it that had already years before put huge amounts of money into this thing that came because his son had died, and he had this very bizarre interest in paranormal phenomena, and his grandparents had the sighting in whatever 1947 or whatever. He was sort of dragged. And what people got to realize, like a lot of these people, Gary Nolan, Eric Davis, all these people are experiencers. They're people who have had or Jim Semivan had the beings in his room. It's a different thing. It's not like a government thing. It's these guys who have this personal obsession to try to figure out what's going on, and they came up against it in their career, and they're trying to figure it out, but they're using their intelligence connection. So I sort of look at them. I got in trouble with them because I don't believe in keeping the stuff secret. It's like MJ-12 too. So what, you 12 guys go and figure it out. Like, how does that help anybody? It's like MJ-12 figure. Now you guys figure it out. I see them like as wild game animal guys. You know, these guys that shoot rare wild game animals, and the only people that see what they've shot are their friends that come into their basement and they show them what they've got. That's what they're doing. They're sharing this sort of little club that they have at a higher level, and they're sharing these secrets. And the odd time one will leak out to you know, the thing, but when they get asked, they basically say no comment, and they basically stay to themselves. They don't trust me, they don't trust you, because you're going to ask the hard questions.
Oh, that's not true, Grant. They love me. They call me nightly. Yeah. There's so much to this to unravel. I could chat with you all day. I know I went past, you know, the hour I asked you for, so I really do appreciate that. Is there anything that you want to add here before I let you go? I mean, is there anything in the future for your research with the Stanton Friedman files? Are you still going through them? Are you taking a break from it? What's in the future for you?
Well, I keep getting sidetracked by this disclosure document thing. So I was fascinated with what I've read so far. I mean, I did a lot of big collections, like the James McDonald collection and the Goldwater collection and all the presidential, and there was really nothing interesting. Like the Clinton one, I don't think I've even read the stuff. I mean, it's thousands of pages, but it's like, you know, exemption certificates and all this sort of stuff. It's just like really boring read. It was pretty interesting. So I'm in contact with the archivist, and I said, once you got the audiovisual stuff, I want to go, because if he taped all his phone calls, there's going to be a couple of phone calls I want to hear. Yeah. And they're going to process all this material, and I'm just obsessed with finding the next thing. So I said I'll go back every 6 months. I've got 5 PowerPoint presentations, so I'm going to do PowerPoint presentations where I go through some of the documents as I read through the stuff and flip the images and do all this kind of stuff. Then I'm going to put them in these PowerPoints and do it. But my field is still something different. It's just that it's so interesting, some of the stuff that I found in Stanton's files, that I'll put it out because I know a lot of people are interested in the stuff. And there's some pretty weird things that I discovered in there.
Yeah, I can't wait to see more. We didn't even get into it, but just to tease your Facebook page, make sure you look Grant Cameron up on Facebook. You posted a short letter with a fragment from the Roswell crash site that somebody had sent Stanton. So there's all sorts of stuff in that. So good luck going through it. Let me know if I can help or help you disseminate anything, because I'm always fascinated in that. Yeah,
she did mention you. I mean, she knows about you, the archivist.
Really?
Apparently you sent some links to her or something. She says, I know, John. Yeah, she's aware of who you are, because I mentioned that you have this, and she knew who you were.
No kid. I'm wondering if maybe maybe I didn't know she was from the archives, and I just helped someone, and that's interesting. Yeah, so you caught me off guard there. I had no idea. Well, that's cool.
We'll link up some of this stuff. I mean, it has to get out. I'll try to get out as much as I can. And my thing is, my disclosure idea is you just put it out and let people decide. Yeah. I don't really have much, you know, skin in the game, because it's not really interesting me. But I want to make sure that people, it doesn't really help me to have all this stuff, and then I die, and then someone else, you know, my kid's going to throw it in the garbage because he's not interested, and you know, it's all going to go for naught. So I'll try to get as much as I can out, and maybe we can do some sort of project where you can put some stuff up. And because she said she says they're going to have to come to the archives if they want to see it. They got to come to the archives. This is not our job to put it on the internet. Yeah. So just massive collection.
Well, the offer is there. I've got a lot of server capability here to host anything for you and or the archive. I'm going to have to look back, because the archive name didn't sound familiar, but maybe I helped someone that, you know, maybe didn't put their title or whatever with the archive. So please send her my best, and if I can help resource-wise, I can house that stuff for free. I mean, I just put it out there. So
you did add your FBI stuff, because she had already gone through some of the files, and before I went, like this maybe 5 months ago, she sent me, once Stan died, she sent me the FBI stuff that she had found where Stan said he was under investigation in 1983. She sent me that. So when I said, when I was there, you've got the second
release,
bunch of FBI stuff. I said, John's got some more FBI stuff. She says, great, I'll put it in the file. So it's in it. She's putting it in the FBI. She's adding all this stuff.
Oh, very cool. Well, I'm gonna have to reach out to them and say hi and offer my help as well. But that's awesome. I appreciate you telling me that, because I had no idea.
Yeah, and she's, as you know, I mean, she'll answer you immediately. Not playing any games, wherever I can help you. The only thing they made me sign an agreement where Stan got a lot of fan mail from people, and they don't want those names out in terms of, so you'll see in some places where I'll just put the letter and I'll cut off the name and stuff. I don't like, altering documents and stuff. But that was one of the agreements. I had to sign a paper that said, if it's like a fan mail from some guy who's just nobody, I said, well, what about the Phil Class stuff? She says, well, that's public stuff and everybody knows about that. You can put that out. But in terms of some,
plus it's Phil Class, who cares?
Yeah, you'll see even the one with the in the CBC article, they talk about the crash material. I should say as the last thing, there is crash material. Stan did get into the crash material, and you see the person sends them the Roswell fragment, and with the letter. And she, I actually told her, I said, I'm sort of advising her. I say, I think you should get that out of there, because somebody's going to come in and
they're going to take it. Yeah.
Legs. And she doesn't realize. She just thinks it's, they're all nice people or whatever.
Yeah.
And so she's very accommodating, and I think she'd help anybody that is there. People just got to realize it's not their job to put this stuff out.
Yeah.
They're in a completely different archive situation.
Sure. Well, that crash material stuff, I'm super intrigued on what Stanton got with that, over the years. I'm sure he collected a lot, and I don't recall ever seeing any stories like that in his presentations that I recall anyway. So definitely keep me informed. And like I said, if you've got anything you want to come back on the show, you're welcome anytime.
Okay. I appreciate it, John.
And thank you, Grant. And thank you all for listening. This is John Greenwald Jr. signing off. We'll see you next time.